That's right. And did you know that the reason it's called the dismal science really isn't for the reason that many students of economics think it is? It's actually called the dismal science because when you go back in history and look at our economists 100, 200 years ago, people such as Malthus, they actually had these just awful predictions that we were all going to die. We were all going to starve. And if you actually, looked at how much food we had and the increase in our ability to grow food and the increase in our population, we were all going to starve, within the next 50 years. And this is, 150 years ago, 200 years ago. That didn't actually happen. So one of the things we should be thinking about economics, not as the dismal science, but maybe more as the optimistic science. And that is because what's really happened is as population growth has increased, we have actually come up with these great new innovations and new ideas and new technologies and new ways to grow more food. And we've always stayed ahead of that curve. As Julian Simon, an economist that has passed, used to call it, that humans are actually the ultimate resource. We are the best resource that exists out there. Population is not a problem. What we want is more people, more smart people to help us solve some of these problems and help us live better and better lives. And in our lifetimes and what we've seen from history, we continue to see this great increase in prosperity and well-being.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's funny that you mentioned or Joel mentioned the dismal science. And when I started, studying economics, I realized that it was doing the opposite of dismal, and actually it was giving me a hope and actual answers to real world problems. And I'm the kind of person, I really hate complaining. I really hate complainers. And that makes life difficult for my wife. So I'm just like, look, like there's a time to complain, but then we have to fix the problem. Like solutions. And pointing back to me talking about like a Christian perspective and using theology. So like in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, I believe, 28, and 26 to 28. And it talks about God's first command to all men, not just Christians, but to all people. And the command is to use his creation for human flourishing and people's benefit. And so pointing back to the trade-offs and limited resources, people have to be wise in the way they use God's creation to promote human flourishing. And that, to me, that opened me up for economics in the sense of making decisions and making efficient decisions and using things to help other people. And like Joel said, like scarcity brings about innovation. And so that was my connection in regards to seeing economics is something that I want to continue to study and get better at.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about it, it's the economics, it's the markets, right? It's the free marketplace that's actually motivating these efficient decisions and helping us cooperate with each other so that we can trade instead of raid. If we look at those political systems and the heavy-handed oppressive types of governments, we don't get that. We don't get that same type of cooperation across the entire community. We might get individuals that are cooperating with each other because they have to, but we don't have that overall aggregate cooperation like we do in Canada and the United States.
I wanted to, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you sort of touched on, some way back historical economic thought. And when I was in school, I actually took history of economic thought, and my prof spoke about, there's less and less professors that are teaching that course. And as the current sort of crop of professors start to retire, this history of economic thought as a course was seeming to fall away to the wayside. And I think, your point about sort of the origination of that term dismal science, and I took it to some extent, and this might not have been totally what you meant, but some of the high level of ignorance or errors that were made in economic thought is good to know that we've developed away from them as opposed to repeating them. And some of them even in Adam Smith with regards to the father of economics, his idea of, he didn't have subjective value theory, and you see sort of the labor or cost theory of value in his writings. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to, the history of economic thought and what your take is on how it's whether or not my professor's point was sort of right that school or part of the school of thought is falling away?
I think that when we talk about sort of the classical economics and economic thought and history, there are probably fewer people that are looking there, but there are certainly a lot of individuals that are still really interested in focusing on some of those ideas and sharing those ideas. I think one of the things that we find hard in today's world is that people tend to have a much shorter focus, a more shorter time frame that they're willing to focus on things. And if you actually read some of those classical books, they're not easy to read. So perhaps what we need to be doing is really thinking about how we can bring those into a more contemporary language so that people can start listening and understanding. One of the things I did find when I was teaching is that students, if you can engage them with stories and ideas and things that are really applied to their life, they're gonna latch onto that much better, and they're gonna be able to use that in their life for a much longer period of time, because it's going to stick with them a lot longer. And so maybe being able to take some of those ideas and those classical pieces and bringing them into today's world and making sure that people understand their relevance. And I do think that's really important, because we do learn from history, and we need to make sure that we're paying attention to some of those mistakes that we've made in history. And frankly, we're not very good at that.
It's funny, because applying it to a person's particular context is helpful as a teacher. And that was helpful for me when, I took my economics course and I was introduced to the work of Thomas Sowell. And so as a Black male, for me, my experience was Black people think a certain way and our narrative is a certain way. And that's how it's going to be. And being introduced to Thomas Sowell and looking more at his work and his approach to Black problems was something I never heard before. And it comes back to the point I was making previously, that it wasn't a dismal science, but it was actually offering a hope and actual solutions to real world problems. And so for me, I was just like, okay, wow. This is helpful in regards to, when he was talking, whether he was talking about poverty or minimum wage and so forth. And so it was very helpful. And of course, then, that kind of being introduced to economics through this one person opens up doors to other people, Milton Friedman, and so forth. So the point I was making is just, it's very important to make sure that we can take the science and put it into a real world context where people can be like, okay, whoa, this hits home. This hits home for me.
Absolutely. And when we talk Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman, who's next? Those two and a handful of other folks.
And Walter
really
Williams.
Helped us
Walter Williams
share economic ideas. Walter Williams. We need more people that are articulate and able to have these conversations, and able to just explain in simplicity or with simplicity how economics impacts our worlds and how important it is to understand that, because there are so many pieces that people really don't understand, and they think they understand them, but they really have not had the training to think about it from an economic way. And so that whole idea of the economic way of thinking is just, it's so important for people to start to understand. And I mean, imagine what a world we would live in if more people were able to think that way and process ideas that way, so that we could actually have some really good facts that sit behind our science and ideas that are really supported, rather than just sort of these ideas that people share with each other without anybody ever really looking at the evidence and understanding what's really going on.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really good. For our listener who likes everything you've had to say, if they want to hear more from you, if they want to reach you, what would be a way for them to get in contact with you? And I'll put some stuff in the show notes page that I've got, a couple podcasts that I found that you were on.
Super.
But for the listener, where can they contact you or find more of your stuff?
Well, you can certainly look at our website at perk.org. You can reach me at holly@perk.org. And we have a tweet at Perk Tweets. We have an Instagram at perk_conserves. And just don't hesitate to look us up, to dig into our website a little bit, and to reach out with an email to me if you have questions. This has just been a wonderful evening chatting with you guys, and I hope we can continue this
most
conversation.
definitely. Thank you for sharing your 2 cents with my 2 cents and Joel's 2 cents.
6 cents makes change.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
To hear the rest of the discussion, click the YouTube link. For the full episode, go to 6centsreport.com. And remember, 6 cents makes change.